welcome everyone. So glad that you all joined me today on this Sunday. Today, we're basically doing a workshop on studying and succeeding in college. So just to give a quick reminder of who I am, in case anyone here is kind of new, my name is Kyeisha and I graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park in spring of 2021. And I studied cellular biology and genetics, a minor in French, and I graduated with straight A's, almost a 4.0 GPA, and now I'm going to medical school next year. And so it's a big passion of mine to basically discuss what I learned in my college journey. And today that'll be all about what I did to be able to get straight A's in college and do well in these classes. So overview of this workshop, just gonna give the introduction I just gave. Then I'm going to be talking about like overall study skills that I think apply to all classes. And then I have some specific tips for biology, chemistry, and biochemistry, because those are like the most highly requested. And then we'll go into the Q&A session. Great. Okay, so let's get started. So I want to start with this slide. Why are we here talking about study skills and why is it important? You see, I have all these pictures of like me doing my studying. And for me, I really feel like when I think about academic success, the equation I think of is like hard work plus determination plus a really good study plan equals academic success. So you're going to be working hard and then also staying determined, because there's going to be times that you go through challenges or failures. And then I think the study plan and the study skills that you use are really important, because there is that saying that, you can work hard, but you should also be working smart. And so you all are, I'm sure, hardworking, you're determined, you want to do well. That's why you're here today. So I want to talk today about the study plan, the study skills that I use that help me to be successful. And the next thing that I also want to share was this quote, which I really like. And it says, "Don't study because you need to know, study because knowledge is power, study because they can never take it away from you. Study because you want to know more. Study because it enhances you. Study because it grows you." And so I think that's also really important. Yes, we're studying for academic success. You want to do well. But also when you have this mindset that you're like, it's a privilege for me to be getting this amazing education, for me to be learning from these professors. And it really is a privilege. And it's an amazing thing to be able to gain this knowledge. And knowledge is power, is something that they can never take away from you. So also having that mindset, I think, too, helps me to be successful. So I wanted to share that. So let's go ahead and get into, basically, I pulled out some of my major tips that I think have helped me to be really helpful. So let's start with the first one. And this first one I wanted to talk about was just how to find your study skills early on. I think this is important because when it comes down to it in this workshop today, I'm going to be giving you, of course, what worked for me, but like anything in life, everyone is different. And so what works for people is going to be different. What works for me might not work for you. And so I'm so glad you guys are here today, and especially for you all who are early in your college journey, because you really need to take the time and figure out what are going to be the best study techniques for you. With that being said, you also have to figure it out every semester. And so I think one thing that helped me be successful is I didn't just find one thing and stuck with it, but every single class is slightly different. Every semester, your demands are different. And so you have to constantly be flexible and figuring out, okay, well, what's going to work best for me for this class and at this moment in time, or even day to day, how am I best going to study today? If I'm really tired, maybe it's just something like flashcards or reading my textbook, so just knowing what's going to work best for you in an overall picture and also day to day. So here I just wrote that studying is another example of practice makes perfect. And I really like to compare it to working out, because I'll get a lot of comments because of my blog or my Instagram, and people are like, how do you do this? How do you just study all day? And I really do think it's like working out. The first time you go to the gym, you're not picking up as much heavy weights. You're probably really tired and probably really sore, but the more often you go, the easier it gets. And that's exactly how my college journey went. From as I continue taking classes and I know what works for me and I'm constantly putting in the effort, I'm constantly going to the gym, it gets easier. And so with that analogy in mind, I really encourage you to find out what are the study habits that are going to work best for you early on, and then keep working on them. And as you do that, you'll have gained confidence in your abilities. You'll know what are like concepts or things that you struggle with. Maybe you struggle with memorization, and then you'll be able to know, okay, I need to focus more of my time on the memorization aspect. And you'll find the best techniques that work for you. I'm going to share some of the ones that I really liked. For example, I have this 3-step note-taking technique that I'll share that I found it works so well for me for my biology courses, and I stuck with it. But for other people, it might not work. So again, it's just all about figuring out what's going to work best for you. And knowing that it is hard and you will struggle, especially transitioning from high school to college. And so again, it's okay to throw out the work of what you did before in high school and just start new. So the next tip, as we start talking about studying, is something that I did that helped me be really, really successful, is to be studying constantly and to not cram. I don't think there's a test I ever crammed. Well, I mean, occasionally you have situations, maybe I crammed a little, but in general, I had a rule where if I have an exam coming up, I start studying for it 2 weeks in advance. So I'll show you all how I do this here. So not really the best looking, I tried to make it like a graphic. So let's just go through this. So basically the way that I think about studying is like studying for me is not like, okay, I'm at the library for this test that's next Monday. Studying is a constant thing that I was doing. So step 1 is of course going to lecture, doing this every day. And then after every single lecture for every single class, there's a moment of reviewing my notes, rewatching lectures, or re-listening to lecture recordings. And I'll talk about that more in depth later on. After reviewing, then I think I was supposed to say I think I was supposed to change this one, sorry. But yeah, basically after reviewing, what I would do here actually is not just reviewing my notes, but then things like flashcards or making study questions for myself, which I'm also going to talk about later on. And then after that, it's going to office hours, because at this step, again, sorry, it's supposed to be something else. At this step, whether I'm doing flashcards or my questions, I'll know, okay, well, this is a topic I don't understand from lecture, so now I'm going to office hours. And then doing practice exams, I'm getting closer to the exam date, so now I'm practicing more. And then of course, the 12-hour McKeldin study day, studying for the exam. And it'll just kind of keeps going on. And so all I'm trying to say is that basically studying is something that I'm constantly doing throughout the semester. And it's not just something that happens on like one day. And I think that's where a lot of students make a mistake in college is in high school, that's how it was. You went to class, test coming up, you studied. In college, if you just go to lecture, go to lecture, go to lecture, all of those notes are just piling up. What you really should be doing is for every single topic that you learn, you're reviewing that, you know that topic, you do those practice problems, you went to office hours, and I basically check that topic off because now we're on to the next one and the next one. So almost treating every topic that you're learning in lecture as a mini exam. So by the time you get to the exam, you're like, okay, well, I've already done practice problems on topics 1 through 5. And maybe topic 6, the professor told you the week of the exam. I still have to do my practice questions for that. But at that point, it's not that you have 6 topics to review. You really just have that new material because you reviewed all of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how exactly I do some of these notes, how exactly I do some of the active studying here. My next major tip is please don't think that you guys have to do this alone. Studying with others, I think, is a key that helped me out throughout college. And from freshman year, I tried to put myself out there and go to things like GSS or review sessions and just ask people, you know, would you like to form a study group? And that's exactly what we did. And so really, I feel like collaboration is absolutely key in college. For one, 2 minds is always better than 1. And so there might be something that you picked up in lecture that they didn't pick up. You're like, oh, you help them out and they'll help you out the same way. I remember, I think it was before one of my cellular biology exams, the night before. And I was like, I felt confident. Like I said, I was reviewing, I did that circle. I knew everything I thought. And it turns out I had this one topic just like completely backwards. And my friend was like, Kyeisha, that's wrong. Like, you've completely misunderstood the professor. It's the opposite way. And like, she really saved me before my exam. So it's just so key. Study with others. They'll help it make it much easier. And they don't have to be your friends. They can just be classmates, but hopefully they also turn into friends along the way. Also, a thing with studying with others is teaching the topic or explaining it to another person. This is huge. If you don't have someone to study with, I still suggest doing this. I know during the pandemic, I had to switch up how I studied a bit. And so instead of explaining it to someone else, I would even record myself. explaining a topic and listen back to it, or write out an explanation, then read it over. That's just so important to make sure that you actually understand it if you're able to teach it to someone else. So yeah, huge tip here is making sure that you're going to sessions like GSS, that you're finding friends and forming study groups. Okay, so we talked so far, I said, make sure you're studying constantly, not cramming, that you're studying with others. And now a major part that I'm going to talk about for a couple minutes is active studying. And here I'm going to get a little bit more specific with how exactly I study that I think really helped me out. So first, I want to be a little bit, I guess, interactive. I just wanted to hear from you guys what you think active studying is versus passive studying. So if you have an example, like an example of something that you think might be either active or passive, and you can either unmute or just put it in the chat.
I think one active is like constantly asking questions based on what you read, and passive is just like just reading it and not like asking yourself what you just read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Also another one would be doing practice questions. So the active would be practice questions versus the passive would just be highlighting or rereading your notes or just rereading the textbook.
Yep, really great one. Anyone else?
And like passive studying can just be like just going to the lecture. That's it, not actually like reviewing your notes after.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys got it. Absolutely. I think I put all of these here. So yeah, so active studying is stuff like when it comes to note taking, you're summarizing notes into your own words, versus passive is just rereading material and highlighting the text. And I've seen a lot of students like fall victim of this, where it's like, yeah, I'm studying. You might have your notes in front of you, and you're just highlighting away. But that, I think I even read like in a psychology article or something, like how bad highlighting is. Like it really does nothing for your brain. So instead of doing that, you would read something, summarizing your own notes, annotate it, turn it into questions, really understand the material. Another way is, you're using flow diagrams or charts to learn information. So you're really synthesizing, especially with college lectures, you get so much information thrown at you. So how can you synthesize it down, connect topics together, and really understand it? You also turn material into questions to be answered, like Anise said. So looking at material and actually turning it into, okay, well, how could this be phrased on a test? And then reviewing constantly with various different methods. So yeah, passive is definitely just showing up, cramming for exams, using notes as originally written, reading a study guide, for example, but you're not actually like testing yourself. So now I want to go through like the different steps that you all are going through in college, and how can you use active studying throughout all those steps of studying in college. So first part is when in lecture. And so one, of course, is getting to the class on time as much as possible. And I also sit at the front of the class so that I was less distracted. I wasn't always in the very front row, but usually like the front three was my go-to, because a lot of times students will have like laptops out, and it just distracted me. So I really suggest sitting at the front. Also, another topic we'll probably talk about in the future is like networking and like, being a standout student. And sitting in the front also helps your teacher, like building that relationship. You're more often to raise your hand, answer questions, and your professor will know you a lot more. But back to studying. So sitting at the front, and then print your lecture slides ahead of time if your professor uploads them. Or I had an iPad, so I'd also have them on my tablet. And so yeah, if your professor does this where they put the PowerPoint up, highly recommend this, because then what you could do is actually just annotate your notes during class. So this allows you to not be like trying to write down every single thing the professor says, but instead you're listening carefully, you're listening to explanations, and you're just annotating stuff. So just writing like, okay, this is what they said verbally that backed up the text that they have. Something else I would do is record my lecture so I can listen back to it afterwards. And that also helped me so that when I'm in my time in class, and why I really recommended going to lecture, is you have that dedicated time that you're first hearing the material. A lot of people, yeah, especially with recording, and they might skip class, and okay, that might work for them. But when I skip class, I think, okay, I'm gonna have to make up for that 15 minutes of time I would have seen the material somehow. And I think that's where people don't realize it. It's like, okay, for me, I go to class and I also watch the recording. So I'm seeing it twice versus someone skipping class and watching the recording. And I think that really helps me because the first time in lecture, it's like, okay, I'm getting the material for the first time. And at that point, of course, you're confused, you don't understand everything, but you give your brain that first opportunity to just soak in the material. Second time now, I'm trying to really put things in my own words. I'm annotating more, I'm taking notes, I'm understanding it. That I could not do in lecture. So that is, I think, really, really helped me out. And so definitely in lecture, go to lecture as much as possible, print your lecture slides if you can, annotate it, oh my gosh, and sit in the front. So now after lecture, as I said, I would record it, or if a professor records it. So now I'll re-listen to the lecture. And I'm usually like an ESJ or McKeldin. And this is something I'm doing even the day after class or that afternoon, depending on my schedule. So again, that constant reviewing. I'm not waiting until the weekend. I'm not waiting until the test coming up. This is right after class, as soon as I have like an hour block of time. So in that hour, I usually have it on like 2x speed, so I get through it a little bit faster. I'm listening to the lecture. And now what personally worked for me is I would type my notes up. So at this point, I'll open up a Google Doc and I have screenshots of the Google Doc to show you all later. But I'm basically typing out, putting things in my own words. And then since it's a Google Doc, I can put like comments, comment bubbles, highlights, hyperlinks. So I'll link things to YouTube videos. So I'll watch a topic, let's say we're talking about chromosomal abnormalities in genetics. I'll throw that term into YouTube, watch a couple videos, use that so I can synthesize the material in a different way. And I'm doing this all in my Google Doc. So this is something, like I said, I'm doing right after class, the day before. If it's a really, really busy week, then the weekend. But as much as possible, I don't like to let more than 2 or 3 topics go by without me doing my review stuff. Okay, and now on top of that, I have my weekly review. So the Google Doc, again, that's just my, again, lecture is just hear the material for the first time. My Google Doc, re-listening to lecture, I'm learning the material for the first time, I'll say. And then throughout the week, of course, GSS discussion is helping me to review. And then the next step that I'll take is I'll rewrite my notes. So at this point so far, and especially since I had an iPad, what worked for me is I've only annotated my notes and I've only typed my notes. But research actually finds that typing your notes is not as effective for your brain as writing it, especially since you basically want to study in the same way that your test is going to be. And in college, I mean, other than COVID, when we went online, it was usually a written test. And so I would do exactly that, make sure I had time to type out my notes or write out my notes, excuse me. And as you see in the screenshot here, this is a reason, especially for biology classes, that I wanted that time where I'm actually writing and drawing. At this time, I'm synthesizing the material. So I'm writing out, okay, this is nuclear transport. And you see clearly how I have step 1, step 2, and I'm drawing it. You know, at this point, I'm in McKeldin, I have music on, and I'm just really trying to make sure that I understand, I can visualize what I just learned. And then I'll also go over any questions that I was given from GSS or discussion, make sure I understand those answers. And I'll start creating my own questions to create my own practice exams. And that I think is also huge because it gives you more practice. And when you create your own questions, it's really active studying because you have to look at the material and look at it from the viewpoint of the teacher. How can I turn this into a question that I see on my exam? So it's something huge that I like to do. And that's exactly what I have here. So now the testing myself part, basically during the weekly review, I'm starting to create those questions like on a Google Doc. As I get closer to the exam, I'll print out those questions as you see here. This is an example of a practice test I would make for genetics. And again, yeah, my tests look like real exams. Like literally could print it out and I'll put like, you know, whatever. I would sometimes take questions from the textbook as well as type up my own as seen here. And then I'll print it out and try answering them without my notes, then go back with my notes and I determine what are places that I really need to supplement my studying. And this part is so important because like you all already alluded to it, passive versus active studying. At the time where you're just given the question and you have this blank box in front of you, that's when you're really gonna tell, can I recall this information for the test? Or do I not know it? Because even when you did all the steps I just said, you went to lecture, you re-listened to it, you wrote notes, it's not that moment until you're staring at the blank screen or the blank paper in front of you and you're like, don't actually know it. So this was huge for me to be able to realize what I didn't know before the exam. So again, this is something I highly, I live by. I did it for like every single test or every single class I took. I would do it for French classes. I would do it for gen eds, and especially for biology, as you see here. Great. So those are kind of, I hope that helped as far as specific tips on, you hear, okay, active studying, but what does that actually look like? And I hope that helped to kind of break down what I did in class, what I did out of class, what I did on the weekends. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically now on what I do during a study day. So one thing I got asked all the time is, how do you study for so long? How do you stay focused? How do you actually be productive when we're sitting there and we're saying, okay, I'm studying for this biology exam today? So I have 7 tips, I believe, for this topic. And I call this slide how to enjoy a 12+ hour study day. Because I do think you have to try to enjoy it in some ways. And when I look back at my videos of me studying and stuff, I wasn't having, I guess I was having some kind of fun. Basically try to make it as less torturous as possible. And if you're really in the zone, it goes by quickly. So here are the actual specific tips I use in order to make it through these days. Tip number 1, find a good study space. And I would switch this up. Personally, I don't know if it's just for me, but if I stayed studying in the same spot, it just didn't work for me. So I would go to McKeldin, I'd be in Starbucks, I'd be in ESJ, and I would just switch up wherever I'm studying. And throughout the day too, I might switch it up. So if I grab lunch and leave McKeldin, after lunch, maybe I'll go to Starbucks. And just a change in location, change of scenery really helped my brain to feel like I wasn't studying for 12 or 15 hours. The next thing is just packing my favorite study snacks. When I will wake up in the morning, it's 8 a.m., about to go study, and I just get everything ready, pack up my study snacks. I have a study playlist. I'm wearing my comfortable clothes. Just I get myself in the mind zone of oh yeah, I'm all ready to go. I buy myself a cup of coffee. That's just what works for me, or tea. You're kind of treating yourself and getting yourself ready. Third thing is you want to reward yourself. And so plan something fun to do after your exams are done, something you can look forward to. Or at the end of a study day, I might be like, okay, when I'm finally done, I go back to my dorm and I'm going to watch this episode of Grey's Anatomy. Even something small like that, it's mindset is really everything. So give yourself that reward, whatever it is that you really like to do. And again, it can just be an hour at the end of the study day that you can look forward to. The next thing is keeping your goals in mind. So it is hard when you're studying there. The main thing, and I even got asked this in a recent medical school interview, a couple times interviews, they ask you, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay driven? Medical school is going to be hard. And I did what I did in undergrad, which is I keep my why as a very, very strong focus. Why am I doing this? And for studying for biology or whatever, it's trying to get into med school. So I will follow doctors on social media. So during my social media breaks, I go on Instagram, I see a doctor, I'm like, let me get back to studying because that's what I want to do. Just focus on the reasons of why I'm doing this. Next tips, study with others. I already talked about this, but it can really help you to stay motivated. And I think just being in a location where other people are studying too can really help you. You can push each other to keep going. Take breaks when needed. I use the Pomodoro method. And so I'll sometimes do 50-minute studying, 10-minute breaks, or 25 minutes studying with 5-minute breaks. So highly, highly suggest that. Your brain does need time to turn off. In the longer 10-minute breaks or 25-minute breaks, I'll take a walk outside or in the library. Definitely make sure you're not fully studying for hours and hours on end. Lastly, switch up your study mediums throughout the day. And so I'll go from reading to watching YouTube videos, to taking notes, to flashcards. So I'm not just sitting there doing the same thing. Again, it's mindset over anything. You're just kind of tricking your brain into thinking that you're switching it up, even though you are still studying for the same topic. So I hope that helped as far as things that at least helped me. And now I'm checking the time, about 30 minutes. I'm going to go into the specific notes, specific tips for specific classes, as I said I would. And again, we'll do questions at the end, but we're almost there. And I hope that this has been helpful so far. So we're going to start with biology classes. And if you're a bio major or pre-med, you take so many. I don't even know how many classes I ended up taking. So the stuff that I already talked about, active studying, my study techniques, all those things apply for all of these topics. And so a couple of things that I really use for biology specifically, one was recording lectures because it's a lot of material. So it helped me to listen back to it. I also have these 4 YouTube channels. Definitely write these down. And I'll send you guys these slides afterwards, but AK Lectures, Ninja Nerd, JJ Medicine, Khan Academy. I thought they had really, really great videos on UMD biology courses. And they're really helpful and yeah, helped me out a lot. Next thing for biology is that 3-step note taking technique that I described. And so that was lecture, annotated notes, typed notes, and written notes. Especially since biology is something like, for example, this picture here, drawing out your nucleus, drawing out your cellular pathway. It really helped me to have all those steps. Next, keep a checklist of topics that we covered. And then I make sure that I study every single topic. And then for biology specifically, make sure that you're not just memorizing material, but that you're understanding it. It's easy to just feel like, okay, let me just understand what are the organelles in a cell, or to memorize it, but make sure you actually understand it. What is the function of this? Why is it important to the cell? Go beyond even what was asked in lecture. I think moments that I stood out the most in lecture is when I asked a question that maybe it had anything related to what we were doing, but it was something I was curious about. Allow yourself to ask those further questions, because even if it doesn't show up on a test, it's going to give you that better understanding that your answers are more rich. They're just a lot better. So again, don't just try to memorize things, really try to understand and go further. So let's look at some example notes as I have here. So for my biology classes, I like to use Google Drive. And as you'll see here, this was for BSci 420, I believe, an advanced cellular biology course. But I did this with all my courses, which is I have a Google Drive folder, and then every single folder is for each topic. And if we look in each of these topics, I'll basically have, my lecture notes that I upload from my iPad, my typed notes, any materials given to me from the professor, and I just keep things really organized here. Here's an example of what my typed notes look like. So there's a lot of diagrams. It's a lot of, again, it's not passive. I'm not just retyping up what was on the slide. This is synthesizing the information. It's putting in diagrams, not just from what my teacher showed me, but maybe I found a better diagram on Google. So it's really, really this part where these are my notes that I understand completely. And I took many hours to put together. I think I have a couple more example notes. Yeah. Here's some more example notes. And this part is, I want to show you all this as far as synthesizing your information. So I created review documents, and my review documents are really, how can I put this material in a graph? Especially when we went to COVID, or if your teachers are still doing open note exams, just a bunch of bullet points are not going to help you. How can you synthesize it? So for example, here, this is sympathetic and parasympathetic effects. And blue is basically anything that was increased. Red is anything that's decreased. And I'm really breaking down information. My teacher did not give us information like this. They gave it to us on slides. Turn it into something that's going to help you. Same with on this side. I break things down. I'm like, this thing, decreased heart rate. What does decreased heart rate means? It means this. I'm breaking it down in ways that I can quickly remember it. So just want to show you all these notes. Again, I'll send you these slides. But when you're making your Google Drive notes, when you're typing out your notes, again, it's not passive. It's really that opportunity where you're synthesizing the information. All right, so let's go to chemistry. So for chemistry, here I have organic chemistry 2 screenshot, which I'm the way I don't remember this stuff anymore, it's totally a different language. Some tips for chemistry that I really want to highlight. One, going to every lecture. Chemistry is hard. It's probably one of the hardest group of courses that you take. So definitely go to lecture, please do. YouTube channel I want to highlight is Organic Chemistry Tutor. They're great. And I do have Gen Chem 2 as well. It's not just Organic Chemistry Tutor, even though that's what the name says. And then for chemistry in particular, you want to do a little bit less of the note taking. So again, in biology, I was doing those versions of notes I showed you. Here, it's practice, practice, practice. So for example, as you see on this screenshot, what I would do here is my Organic Chemistry 2 professor would have a bunch of old exams. And what I do is, again, I study topic by topic, right? Constant study. So if we're learning nitrate reactions out week, let's say, I'll go through his exam, pull out, screenshot out those questions, and then I'm practicing that for this week. So again, no one gave me these questions, but I'm taking the step and I'm making those practice questions for myself and I'm going through them. Same with Gen Chem 2, whatever topic it is, go in your textbook, pull out those practice questions, ask your teacher, ask your GSS leader, ask your TA, get as much practice in as you possibly can. Next note, get your professor's old exams if you can, and make sure you take those exams. For orgo and biochem in particular, it's very easy to just be like, oh, I'm just going to memorize. Do not memorize. That's how you're going to end up failing the exam for organic chemistry. And I have a whole blog post on studying for organic chemistry. But what you really want to do is understand why does that oxygen become oxidated in this step? Why? Because it has something to do with the electrons or positive, negative charges. I also tutored organic chemistry, so we can talk. I can talk forever about it. We'll talk about it in our one-on-one sessions, but I'll tell you how I've made the steps actually into a story and something I can understand. And same for biochemistry. And then for Gen Chem 2, make sure that you're knowing your formulas, you know when to use them. And again, it just comes down to practice. Okay, so as we go to wrapping it up, here are some example notes. So as I said here, organic chemistry, I'm constantly practicing. And then what I would do is, as I get something wrong, I'll screenshot it and I'll pull it into this long document I would make called Common Mistakes or Harder Problems. And then a couple times a week, I'm going through why I made the mistake and trying them over again until I get them right. What do my notes look like? You can see over here. This is what I mean by understanding and not just memorizing. So you can see in the yellow, I'm writing down the steps of what's occurring. So step 1, I'm protonating the carbonyl and I'm showing what that looks like. Next step, alcohol nucleotide attacks. And so for me, I tell people, I laugh because if you listen to me while I was studying organic chemistry, I would literally be like, nucleophile attacks, like as I'm doing it, like that's how I remember it. So on the test, I'm like, okay, first we protonate the carbonyl, nucleophile attacks, protonate, I know the steps because that's the way I write my notes down. I break it down. I don't just throw it on the page and think I'm going to memorize it. So hopefully that helps. And finally, biochemistry. I have an 18-page guide on my blog that specifically goes over how I study for biochemistry. And so I will link that to you all after this call. But just quick things. Basically, I combine techniques for biology and chemistry. YouTube channels, AK Lecture, Ninja Nerds. And as I showed in this last step, you really want to put in words why every step is happening when you're learning your mechanisms. And just some example notes here. This picture here is when I was studying for Biochemistry 2 for my final exam. And I sat there and I made summary sheets of every single mechanism that we learned and understanding why it happened, understanding every step. And that just helped me out extremely, extremely much. As you see in these ones, I'll throw in like screenshots from my textbooks. I'll rewrite things by hand. As you see in this one here, again, I'll put things step by step, make sure I understand every step. And hopefully this helps you see just the way that I synthesize material when I'm studying. So I think that kind of helps, yeah, summary. So yeah, I think hopefully that gets us to the summary now. So as you can see of everything I described, and again, this was still, I tried to synthesize it because I didn't want to talk for too long, but being successful in college takes a lot of work. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no other way for me to say it. And there's no magic tip that I can give you all. I really tried to like give the most important information I could. But the truth is I studied for hours. I studied day in and day out with balance. I mean, if you know my blog and stuff, you know that I did a lot of things on campus. I was happy. I wasn't, I was definitely balanced, but I definitely was studying a lot. Also, don't give up. I know it's easy. It's even easy for me now to look back on my journey and just think, oh yeah, I just did it. She just did it. Like it was fine. No, it was hard. Like there's some nights where you felt like giving up. There's some nights where I just couldn't understand a topic and I went to bed frustrated. There were failures. There were 30% exams. Like it's a journey. It's ups and downs. But my thing is have that mindset where you're going to learn from your failures, adjust your study techniques, and just keep going. And the main thing that I want to do with these workshops is showing you all that it is possible, because I didn't come into college thinking that I would be able to do this well. And so it's important for me now that I'm done to give you all the tools and what I learned. Finally, my biggest takeaway is active studying. 100%, every single class, everything you do, make sure you're active studying. That's going to make the most of your time, and it really works. Okay. More tips can be found on my blog. I have a lot of blogs on studying, as you see these titles here. And so I'll definitely send those out after this call to my mentees in our group chat. And for anyone else who's not in the official mentoring group, just go on my blog and you can use the search bar here and search for these titles. Alrighty. Took a little bit longer than I wanted to, but let's go ahead and open up for questions. Thank you all so much for listening, and I am going to go ahead and stop the recording now.